Somalis are not black.
From taming camels, having some of the earliest burials in Africa, having some of the earliest stone walls, and farming and trading goods like myrrh and taming plants. Somalia is one of the most fascinating places in ancient history. It's actually one of those places that make it obvious that Africa was not just a side player in history, but a mainstay internationally. Somalia traded with China, India, Europe, Egypt, Arabia, all over the world. And everybody knows this. Everybody who studies history. And here's the thing: Somalia, known as the land of Punt back in the day, was not just this place where it's there in the past. It's called the land of Punt, and some people know about it. Instead, think of it as a key area where specific goods come from and specific inventions develop and specific people start to move from the area. For example, let's start with the camel. The camel domesticated first in Somalia, which it's found in a lot of places in as wild animals, even certain types that are similar to that animal, like the ones in America, but it was domesticated first in Somalia, and then it was found to be domesticated later everywhere, spread from Somalia, which tells you that Somalia had a deep influence. Because right now, some people don't even know that. Some people don't know that that's an accepted fact by historians. Secondly, when it comes to the myrrh trade or the obsidian trade or anything like that, some people don't realize that the Somalians left parts of Somalia and probably populated um, what you'd call Arabia and probably populated what you'd call Egypt. And some people think when I say that the Bantus have a similarity with ancient Egyptians, that I mean that the ancient Egyptians are Bantus. But really, in my opinion, the ancient Egyptians are most closely related to the Somalians. And on top of that, this is the biggest point. On top of that, the religions of the ancient Somalis seem to be very similar, even in names and stuff like that, to the ancient Egyptians. In fact, to the point where it's considered the Afroasiatic branch, the Afroasiatic chain of religion between Somalia and Egypt is basically it's actually more similar than Nubia and Egypt religious wise, even though I would say that Nubia's religion was also very similar to the ancient Egyptian one. So let's get into the religion. So if we look at pre-Islamic religion of Somalia, we see that there's a couple religious things that are similar to Egypt and then similar to other places as well, Africa and the Middle East. And the reason for this is because Somalia, again, is a very influential area. If you notice, there's Hur or Hor, I don't know how to say it in Somali, who was a messenger of death and had the form of a large bird. The deity was akin to Horus of ancient Egypt and played a similar role in Somali society. So this creature was related to the one in Egypt, and this is no coincidence. This is not weird, and we see this over and over again. There's other. We're going to get into detail with Egypt and its similarity to Somalia and religion later, but that's just one example of the similarities between Somalia and ancient Egypt in terms of their religion. But a lot of things, even their customs, even their dances, even certain things, I honestly think if we had more information, and we probably do, about the pre Islamic Somalian society, we could probably crack specific things about the ancient Egyptians, including dances, reasons for art, reasons for religion. One of the things that I don't like that people do is they look at the stories of religion more than they look at the belief of the religion of the ancient Egyptians and everybody else. Like, if you think about it, the story of Jesus isn't as important to Christians as the messages. And this is true also of the ancient Egyptians, and we need to look at that in that way so that we don't miss the point of the religion and think that their religion was more just stories on top of just them being lessons for the average person, which is why when you look at this, and the reason why I'm saying all this is because when you look at this, you're going to go, oh, so they had the same story. No, they had the same beliefs. I want you to get that in your head. Not they had the same stories, they had the same beliefs. And why is that important? Well, it's important when you look back in the day and you notice that the place where the ancient Egyptians said their gods came from or their ancestors came from is further south to places like Somalia. And when you connect this belief that they believed that they came from somewhere in Somalia to the fact that the Somalians have a similar religion, ancient Somalians had a similar religion to these people, and that there's a whole bunch of things that they shared in common, some of the earliest burials in Somalia, actually, I think the oldest one. And there's all these artistic things that are similar. There's farming. There's all kinds of stuff that is found in Somalia at the time that makes these two places seem like they were twin states. Maybe not the same state, definitely not. But I wouldn't say definitely not. But they were twin states, and that they were not even unaware of the fact that they were twin states. They probably knew of each other and saw each other as twin states, meaning that they're akin to each other, they're similar, and they notice it. Just like how maybe, what's a good example? Let's say Canada and America is a good example. Unlike Egypt, Somalia is actually closer to the internal parts of Africa. And so it had lots of access to other African places. And of course, we find DNA that shows that people from Somalia, earlier people from Somalia, and people who are currently in Somalia, their ancestors did traverse down as far. I mean, in some cases, they allege that they traveled as far down as southern Africa, and that they were then replaced by the Bantu people after that, and that people like the Pygmies and the Nilotics and something like that, they occupied that space and they fused with some of these Somali people, or they were just part of that population as well. So one of the people that I've seen, one of the videos that I've seen go around is all Somalis black, which is silly because, yeah. But let's watch a video that talks about this.
Somalis are not black.
Congratulations, your application has been granted. It was quite evident that you are very eager to separate yourself from the black community. And so we wish you all the best as you embark on this fight to fight white supremacy all on your own.
I don't care if I'm the first person to say this, but us Somalis are not black. There's a difference between African and black. Let me ask you a question. Are Moroccans and Egyptians black? This
Let's clear something up real quick. There is no difference between the word African and black. Those are synonyms. And I understand some people say that it's from the continent of Africa, but being from the continent of Africa means being native to the continent of Africa. All humans are native to the continent of Africa, but also, if we're talking about it in a more recent form, then only black people are native to the continent of Africa. And that's why they are African. Now, you could say there's other people in the continent of Africa right now. Does that mean they're African? Well, that depends on if you want to use the word African, meaning anyone who is currently in the continent of Africa, which is fine. But then you have to admit that there's three words for Africa because native African is what I would say the Somali people are. Forget the word African. That's just a language game. I'm talking about native African people who are not outsiders who came in. Native African meaning black.
Our history, our culture are so much more different compared to these other countries that are actually black. Joshua Bill, if you're not black, what are you? I'm Somali.
Somali is not a race. This guy is clearly black just by looking at him. And it's also not his skin color that gives away that he's black, because there are people who are not black or black skin color, but his hair gives it away. His lips give it away. The fact that he said he's Somali gives it away. And the funny part is, you're probably thinking, why would anybody want to separate themselves from black people? Well, that's a good question. Think about that for a second before you scroll and make comments. Why is it so important for some black people to separate themselves from the black people everywhere else in the world? And of course, being mixed with other people means nothing, because for the most part, Somali people are black African and their history stems in Africa forever.
Let me ask you a question. If you were to see a very dark Indian man, would he be identified as a black person or just an Indian?
Dark-skinned Indians specifically are identified as black Indians, but for the outside world, they're identified as Indians. And of course, this doesn't mean anything because, of course, Indians, some African traditions are actually maintained by Somali people, and some of them moved because of the slave trade to Arabia, and some of them are in North Africa since oldest time. And I even insist that what I'm talking about, this sound called ululating, must have been done by the ancient Egyptians as well. This is one sound that I guarantee the ancient Egyptians would have known about. It's all over Africa. It's in West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, all over, and it's rooted in that area, and then it's spread throughout the world. Of course, the sound is found in other places in the world, but of course, I'm not like the Europeans who believe that things can only be invented once. This sound was invented multiple times and used as a cheer. Even in Native Americans, you can find it. But there's also twerking, which came from Africa and then spread throughout Arabia. And then through modern times, it spread to hip hop. But you could tell that hip hop people took it from Africa because, I mean, they were obsessed with Africa and sort of like the islands of America that had black people. And the islands of Africa, they on purpose took it. There's a lot of stuff within the islands of Africa in their music, including raga and stuff like that. You can tell that there's like deep reach to Africa. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that twerking is the best invention made by man, but it clearly shows a direct descendancy between East Africans, North Africans, Southern Africans, Eastern Africans, Western Africans, and everybody. While I'm talking about the art of Africa, outside of the sort of Arabic transformation of Somalia had a similar thing to Africa where percussion matters a lot. And you saw in that video that I showed you where those people are dancing, percussion mattered a lot in Africa. It's actually one of those telltale signs.